There is a population in Pakistan that should not exist, not in any political sense, not culturally, genetically. According to every model of human prehistory ever built, this community is an impossibility. They live in 3 valleys in the Hindu Kush, Bumbaret, Rumbar, Berir, about 4,000 people total. They call themselves the Kalash, and their DNA says they have been sealed off from the rest of the world for roughly 12,000 years. Every spring they celebrate Joshi, a festival where fermented milk is poured from carved wooden bowls. Here is the problem. The Kalash are almost universally fixed for the ancestral variant of the MCM6 gene, the version associated with lactose intolerance. Their neighbors in Pakistan carry the lactase persistence variant at nearly 30% frequency. The Kalash should not be able to drink that milk. They drink it anyway. Dr. Qasim Ayub spent years studying this exact question at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute in the United Kingdom. In 2015, his team published something that almost nobody in the field knew what to do with. They had sequenced the Kalash genome, and the numbers stopped making sense. The population had split from all other South Asian groups approximately 11,800 years ago. Since then, their effective population size had stayed below 3,000 individuals, and they had received 0 detectable gene flow, 0 mixing, from any other living population on Earth. But here's where it gets strange. When researchers divided all human genetic variation into 6 worldwide clusters, the 6th cluster consisted of exactly 1 group, the Kalash. One village system in Pakistan, as genetically distinct from their neighbors as Europeans are from East Asians. Their oral tradition claims descent from Alexander the Great. Genetic testing found no Greek ancestry whatsoever. Instead, the Kalash share more genetic drift with MA1, a 24,000-year-old hunter-gatherer from Siberia, than any other South Asian population does. A Paleolithic Siberian signal alive in the Hindu Kush in 2026. If you've ever actually wondered where you come from, not the family story, but the real biological answer, then you're going to want to subscribe. Because what comes next goes deeper than most people are willing to go. A genetic lineage assumed extinct for 12,000 years is alive in 4,000 people who have no idea they are the last descendants of a Paleolithic Northern Eurasian population. And they are about to tell us something even more impossible about the civilization that built the Indus Valley. Actually, hold on. Before we go any further, I want to know something. The Kalash are fixed for the lactose intolerance allele, yet they celebrate a milk festival. If your DNA test showed you carried a trait that contradicted something your family has done for centuries, would you trust the genes or the tradition? Drop your answer below, and I mean it. I read them. Because honestly, your answer might be more connected to what I'm about to say than you'd think. At Gonur Depe, in the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan, archaeologists found a burial that did not belong. The body was positioned differently from the others. The grave goods included beads that matched Indus Valley styles, and the DNA said something stranger. This individual carried 45 to 82% Iranian farmer-related ancestry, 11 to 50% AASI, ancient ancestral South Indian ancestry, and almost no Anatolian farmer ancestry. The local BMAC population carried 20 to 25% Anatolian-related ancestry. This person was an outsider in every way. Dr. Vagesh Narasimhan, working with Dr. Nick Patterson and Dr. David Reich at Harvard Medical School in the United States, analyzed 523 ancient genomes for a 2019 study in Science. They found 11 individuals at Gonur and Shari Sokta in eastern Iran who carried what they called the Indus periphery cline. These people had no detectable Anatolian ancestry. They carried Y chromosome haplogroup H1A1A2, found today primarily in southern India. The authors proposed they were migrants from the Indus Valley Civilization, and yet the data said the exact opposite. We have been studying the Indus Valley Civilization for 150 years. We have found exactly 1 ancient genome from it. We found 11 of its people in Central Asia. The IVC was not a closed system. Its people were migrating 1,000 kilometers west into the Bactria-Margiana complex, carrying a genetic signature that was invisible to the populations they moved among, because the IVC people lacked the Anatolian farmer ancestry that defined everyone else in the region. At Shar-e Sokta, 8 outliers dated 3300 to 2000 BCE were buried with IVC-style artifacts. They were not traders who died on the road. They were a genetic gradient, a cline, of people with variable proportions of Iranian-related and AASI-related ancestry living among populations they did not genetically resemble. A migration wave reshaped the ancient world, left genetic descendants in hundreds of millions of people, and built the first urban society in South Asia, and we do not have a name for them. We do not even know what they called themselves, but we know what they were not. In 2013, Dr. David Reich founded his ancient DNA laboratory with one question. Who were the people of the Indus Valley Civilization? The problem was the climate. The heat and humidity of lowland South Asia destroy ancient DNA almost on contact. Reich's team screened 61 skeletons. They made over 100 sequencing attempts. They got one genome, one woman. Buried at Rakhigarhi in Haryana, India, around 2600 BCE. Dr. Vasant Shinde, who led the excavation at Deccan College in Pune, India, worked with Dr. Neeraj Rai at the Birbal Sahni Institute of Paleosciences in Lucknow and the Harvard team. In 2019, they published the results in Cell. The genome showed a mixture of Iranian-related and AASI ancestry, 0 steppe ancestry, 0 Anatolian farmer ancestry. But the Iranian-related component was the finding that broke the field. It came from a lineage that had separated from all known Iranian farmers, herders, and hunter-gatherers before those groups had even split from each other. More than 12,000 years ago. This discovery was made 7 years ago. Nobody talked about it, until now. The Fertile Crescent invented farming roughly 10,000 years ago. The ancestors of the Indus Valley people split from the ancestors of Iranian farmers 12,000 years ago. That means the Iranian-related ancestry in South Asia did not arrive with farmers. It arrived with hunter-gatherers, people who were already genetically distinct before anyone on Earth had planted a seed. For decades, archaeologists assumed farming spread to South Asia through migration from the Iranian plateau. The Rakhigarhi genome proves that assumption is genetically impossible. The shared ancestry between Iranians and South Asians is not evidence of a movement of people. It is evidence of two groups of hunter-gatherers who diverged before farming existed, and who may have developed agriculture independently or adopted it culturally without mixing their genes. The woman at Rakhigarhi lived around 2600 BCE. She was buried with pottery, shell bangles, and a copper mirror. Her civilization invented standardized weights, urban drainage, and trade networks stretching to Mesopotamia. And her ancestors had been genetically distinct from all known farming populations for at least 9,000 years before she was born. One carbon date and one haplogroup frequency shatter the timeline everyone was using. The Iranian-related ancestry in Pakistan and India split from Iranian farmers more than 12,000 years ago. But the steppe ancestry that now dominates the region arrived only 3,500 years ago. There is a 9,000-year gap between the origin of the people and the origin of the culture we associate with them. And in that gap, something happened that no model predicted. At Aligrama in the Swat Valley of Pakistan, archaeologists found megalithic graves dated to around 850 BCE. The burials were female-centered. Women were laid as primary occupants. Men were secondary interments, sometimes with cut marks from defleshing. The anthropologist Maria Letizia Pulcini documented the blade marks on the bone. The genetics said something equally sharp. The Swat Valley time transect, analyzed by Narasimhan and Reich in that same 2019 science study, showed steppe ancestry arriving after 2000 BCE and increasing over time. But 3 individuals from Aligrama, dated to around 850 BCE, showed almost 0 steppe ancestry. Other Swat sites from the same period carried roughly 12%. Aligrama was not an outlier by date, it was an outlier by location. What they found next changed everything they thought they knew about this. We know steppe ancestry entered South Asia. We know it is linked to Indo-European languages. But at Aligrama, in 850 BCE, there was no steppe ancestry. And the people buried there were already speaking, or would soon speak, an Indo-European language. The steppe migration was not a wave, it was a patchwork. Some valleys absorbed it, others resisted it for centuries. At Udagram, another SWAT site, the primary burial was a mature adult female resting directly on the grave floor, followed by a secondary male burial with defleshing cut marks. This was not conquest. This was a local ritual integrating new people into an old structure. Two groups that were assumed to be genetically linked, the steppe pastoralists and the early Indo-European speakers of South Asia, are confirmed by DNA to have been the same people in some valleys and complete strangers in others. The language spread without the genes, or the genes spread without the language. Either way, the identity we assigned to ancient Pakistan was wrong. In the Kalash valleys today, a man submits a saliva sample for Y chromosome analysis. The expectation is clear. If any population in Pakistan should carry R1a-Z93, the hallmark Y haplogroup of Indo-Iranian steppe pastoralists, it should be the Kalash. They speak an Indo-European language. They live in the heart of the Hindu Kush. The result? R1a-Z93 appears at 2% frequency. A recent phylogenetic analysis of the Kalash, published in 2025, proposed that 77% of their Y DNA clades trace back to early Neolithic Iran and the Fertile Crescent, haplogroups like R2, G2, and J2. R1a-Z93, the typical signature of Indo-Iranians, sits at roughly 2%. The study suggested the Kalash may be the closest living proxy for a pre-Indo-Iranian Neolithic population of northern Pakistan, a group that escaped meaningful admixture from Indo-Aryan speakers. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. The Kalash speak an Indo-European language. They have been genetically isolated for 12,000 years. They carry almost no R1a-Z93. Either Indo-European languages reach the Hindu Kush without steppe ancestry, which contradicts the standard model, or the Kalash adopted the language from neighbors without genetic mixing. Either way, language and genes have been decoupled in this region for millennia. The Kalash celebrate Milk Day while carrying the lactose-intolerance allele. They have survived through cultural adaptation what their genes could not provide. Every biological metric says they should not exist. They exist. If the Kalash can speak an Indo-European language without steppe ancestry, then the presence of R1a-Z93 in other Pakistani populations is not evidence of language transmission. It is evidence of sex-biased migration, male-mediated gene flow that spread genes without necessarily spreading the language that supposedly traveled with them. A conflict from 4,000 years ago was never resolved. The same genetic fault line that separated steppe-bearing populations from steppe-free populations in the Swat Valley still maps onto modern borders and modern identities. In Mangaluru, on the coast of Karnataka, India, Dr. Ranajit Das was not looking for a new ancestral component. He was looking for disease variants. His team at Yenapoya University was studying the Koraga tribe, fewer than 10,000 people, speaking a Dravidian language related to the North Dravidian branch that includes Brahui, still spoken in Baluchistan, Pakistan. Das wanted to understand why the Koraga suffer high infant mortality and neurological disorders. The endogamy that caused the diseases had preserved something else entirely. In October 2025, Das and his colleagues, including Dr. M.S. Mustak at Mangalore University, Dr. Jason Sequeira, and Professor George Van Dream at the University of Bern, published their findings in the European Journal of Human Genetics. They had identified a sixth distinct ancestral source in South Asia, a Proto-Dravidian component that diverged roughly 4,400 years ago in the region between the Iranian Plateau and the Indus Valley. It is distinct from AASI, Neolithic Iranian, and steppe ancestry. It makes up roughly 20% of the modern Indian genome, and it links the Koraga of India to the Brahui of Pakistan through a genetic corridor that has no archaeological signature. This isn't just ancient history, this is in your DNA right now. In our last video on Black American DNA, we saw how isolation and forced migration can preserve genetic signals that rewrite history. Dr. Das just found the same thing in the Koraga tribe, but the force was a 4,400-year-old climate collapse, not the Middle Passage. If you watched that video, what parallel hit you hardest? If you didn't, the link is pinned. Either way, what genetic story from your own ancestry do you think is still invisible? For 20 years, geneticists modeled South Asians as a mixture of three components: AASI, Neolithic Iranian, and Steppe. The Koraga data demanded a fourth. This Proto-Dravidian component is not a minor admixture. It is a major ancestral source that was invisible because it was distributed across too many populations in too small a proportion to detect, until an isolated tribe on the coast of India concentrated it enough to be seen. The Brahhui of Baluchistan, Pakistan, speak a North Dravidian language. They are surrounded by Indo-Iranian speakers. A 2025 study found that the Brahhui have lost almost all genetic connection to other Dravidian-speaking populations through extensive admixture with neighboring Balochi, Sindhi, and Pathan groups. They speak a language their genes no longer remember. The Koraga remember genetically what the Brahhui remember linguistically. Something the entire field agreed was true is precisely backwards. The three-component model was not incomplete. It was wrong. The Neolithic Iranian ancestry in South Asia was not a single stream. It was at least two streams, one that became the IVC and one that became the Proto-Dravidians, and they diverged before farming existed. The field spent 20 years looking for the wrong number of ancestors. Here is a number that should stop you cold. The Indus Valley Civilization covered approximately 1 million square kilometers. It lasted from 3300 to 1300 BCE. It had cities of 40,000 people, standardized weights, drainage systems, trade networks stretching to Mesopotamia. And we have one genome, one individual from Rakhigarhi, a single data point representing an entire civilization. Dr. David Reich, in that 2019 Cell paper, cautioned that the Indus Valley Civilization was probably genetically extremely diverse, and that additional genomes would enrich the picture. But additional genomes have not come. The heat and volatile climate of lowland South Asia destroy DNA. Pakistan and India have produced almost no ancient DNA from the IVC heartland. The Rakhigarhi sample remains the only ancient genome from the civilization that is the largest source of ancestry for modern South Asians. There are three things this study revealed. The third one is the one that changes everything. First, the Kalash are vanishing. Their valleys are being settled by outside communities. Their genetic isolation, the very feature that makes them scientifically invaluable, is eroding through modern contact. Second, the Koraga number fewer than 10,000, and their endogamy is causing disease. Third, the Brahhui have already lost their genetic signature through admixture with neighboring populations. We are not running out of time to sequence ancient DNA. We are running out of living populations who carry these signals concentrated enough to be read. The models are not approximations. They are confessions of ignorance dressed as equations. If you are of South Asian descent, your ancestry is modeled on a single skeleton and a handful of isolated tribes. The percentages on your DNA test, 45% South Asian, 25% Iranian, 20% steppe, are built on a foundation of one burial and 4,000 mountain villagers. The billions of South Asians alive today descend from a handful of survivors whose genetic signals we are watching vanish in real time. In a lecture hall in the 1970s, an archaeologist drew an arrow on a chalkboard. The arrow moved from the Fertile Crescent eastward across the Iranian plateau into South Asia. It represented farmers. The farmers represented the Neolithic Revolution. The Neolithic Revolution represented the origin of civilization. For 50 years, that arrow was the model. The Rakhigarhi genome erased it. The Shinde paper stated it directly. The Iranian-related ancestry in the IVC derives from a lineage that predates the separation of Iranian farmers, herders, and hunter-gatherers. It contradicts the hypothesis that shared ancestry reflects a large-scale spread of Western Iranian farmers east. Instead, ancient genomes from the Iranian plateau and the IVC descend from different groups of hunter-gatherers who began farming without substantial movement of people. Everything I just told you? Hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. The farmer did not come. The farmer was already here. The arrow on the map is a line drawn in chalk that the DNA refuses to follow. The woman at Rakhigarhi was buried with copper and shell. Her civilization had no temples, no palaces, no evidence of kings. And now we know it had no migrant farmers from the West. The IVC was built by people who were genetically distinct from the Fertile Crescent for 9,000 years before they built their first city. They were not pupils, they were contemporaries. If South Asian farming was independent, then the superiority models of civilization, where complexity spreads from a single center, collapse. The IVC was not a backwater receiving technology from the West. It was an independent origin point of urban complexity, built by a lineage that had been genetically distinct for millennia. The civilization blamed for bringing agriculture to South Asia is exonerated by genomic data. They never came. The real culprit is the assumption that farming spreads by migration rather than independent invention. That assumption is still at large. A Koraga mother holds her child on the coast of Karnataka. The child has a neurological disorder. The disorder is endemic to the tribe because of endogamy. The endogamy preserved the Proto-Dravidian genetic signal. The signal is killing the child. Dr. Das's 2025 study identified multiple genetic variants associated with higher infant mortality and neurological disorders in the Koraga. The same isolation that allowed the Proto-Dravidian component to be detected is the isolation that causes the disease. Dr. Ayub's 2015 study found that the Kalash carry a stop-gain variant in the ACTN3 gene at 93% frequency, likely selected for mountain survival. But the same isolation fixed the lactose-intolerance allele, creating a biological paradox the Kalash navigate through culture alone. We asked what Pakistani DNA has that shouldn't exist. We did not ask what it costs to keep it. The Kalash, the Koraga, the Brahui, they carry genetic signals that violate our models because they paid for them with isolation, endogamy, and genetic load. Their DNA is not a window into the past. It is a scar. The Kalash celebrate Milk Day while carrying the lactose-intolerance allele. The Koraga preserve a 4,400-year-old genetic signal through marriage practices that cause disease. The Brahui speak a language their genes have forgotten. Each population carries a different fragment of the impossible, and each fragment is paid for in suffering. You may carry the ACTN3 variant at low frequency. You may carry the Proto-Dravidian component in trace amounts. You are not separate from these populations. You are their recombination. The question is not whether you carry their genes. The question is whether you will carry their memory. A genetic marker appearing only in descendants of one ancient catastrophe may be biological memory. The 4,200-year aridity event that devastated settlements from the Mediterranean to the Indus may have driven the northward movement that shaped the Kalash, the Koraga, and the Brahui. The trauma of that climate collapse may be written in their genes, not as a story, but as a frequency. And you may carry it. The Rakhigarhi burial at dawn. No reconstruction, no actors. Skeleton RGR 7.3, BR01, HS02. Laid north-south with shell bangles and a copper mirror. The woman at Rakhigarhi had no steppe ancestry, no Anatolian farmer ancestry, an Iranian-related component that predates farming, and she is the only representative of a civilization of millions. Dr. Reich's caution still stands. The IVC was probably genetically diverse, but we will never know. The climate has destroyed the DNA. The living isolates are vanishing. The sample size of one is the sample size of infinity. The Kalash population is approximately 4,000. The Koraga fewer than 10,000. The Brahui have already lost their genetic signature. Each of these populations is a fragment of a puzzle we do not have the pieces to complete, and the pieces are being ground into dust by modernity. If you are of South Asian descent, your ancestry is modeled on a single skeleton and a handful of isolated tribes. The percentages on your DNA test are built on a foundation of one burial and 4,000 mountain villagers. You carry the recombination of ANI and ASI, of steppe and AASI, of Iranian-related and Proto-Dravidian. The impossible signals are in you, diluted to statistical invisibility. You are the reason they are vanishing. You are also the reason they survived. The woman at Rakhigarhi had no name, but she had descendants, and one of them is watching this.